Thanks a lot. You guys know how to put on a party, man. I'm from Chicago, Chicago Bears fan. It was you guys have actually a real kicker here, I heard, that doesn't hit the upright 4 times in one game. That's an amazing accomplishment, if you want to call that an accomplishment. But the weather's awesome. The thing that we have in common between Boston and Chicago, a day like this is actually awesome. Like to get a day like this in late January in Boston or Chicago, you're very appreciative of Mother Nature. So, you know what? Give you guys a quick background. I've been at VMware for 6 months now, so I'm a VMware guy, but I'm not really a VMware guy yet. You know, I haven't been indoctrinated in the ways of the VMware culture from an employee perspective. I'm still very much community focused. I've spent, prior to VMware, I ran the CTO advisor. It is what it sounds like. I advise CTOs, I talk to CTOs about their IT strategy, where they see their business moving to, how to get there, and what are their competitors and the rest of the industry is going. VMware liked that talk track, and they hired me to do more or less the same thing. Prior to the CTO advisor, I was a customer. I worked for a large biopharmaceutical north of Chicago. Before that, I was a management consultant at PwC. Before that, Lockheed Martin. And then before that, just a systems administrator. So my career has spanned the gambit of what you can do, I think, in IT, from either a practitioner, you know, installing vSphere, or it wasn't even called vSphere, installing ESXi on a IP-based SAN back in the early 2000s, to getting called in the middle of the night to come and fix NT 4.0 broken server, to hiring staff and setting strategy and all of that. So my career has spanned the gambit. So with that said, let's go into kind of what we're hearing a lot in the market from, and I have to say, I've contributed to some of this. Before VMware, spent a few years as a contributor for Tech Republic, Tech Target, ZDNet. I've written a lot about the cutting edge. And we've heard these types of stats. 80% of IT decision makers say that they're going to move their applications back from the cloud into the private data center. You know, we've seen the big rush to get to public cloud, and we've heard that folks are moving back from the public cloud back to the private data center. Then we hear stories like this at Chick-fil-A, that of their 2,000 restaurants, they've deployed the infrastructure to run Kubernetes and containers, 6,000 containers in Kubernetes at the edge of the store. That's a big contrast to say that, hey, you know what? We're going to go public cloud. Oh, you know what? And how many folks in here actually are doing like public cloud, proper public cloud? You have containers, VMs, et cetera, running in the public cloud. And how many of you have kind of just dabbled? You've brought up a VM in AWS, kind of looked at this thing, and it's like, you know, this looks a lot like what I do on-prem, whether it's my Hyper-V environment, my VMware vSphere environment, or some competitor to VMware and Hyper-V. You look at it, you're like, you know what, just some other person's data center. A VM is a VM. A VM that runs in my private data center looks an awful lot like a VM that runs in a public cloud. From a manager's perspective, from an IT decision maker's perspective, that is the mindset. We see a lot where that previous slide, what happens is that the public cloud is treat treat it as just someone else's data center. We take our existing IT operations model and we move that into the public cloud. So we provision VMs, we manage the VMs, we put our management tools on top of that, and then we figure out, you know what, it's a heck of a lot more expensive to do exactly what I do now in the public cloud. If I'm not going to change what I do now, if I'm not going to change my operating model, I'll just bring that stuff back on site and do it cheaper and better. But then we run into these examples of what Chick-fil-A is doing, where they're taking a massive amount of resources, pushing them out to the edge, and then putting this net new technology on there. Then we have conversations like this. Just 2 weeks ago, I had an architectural workshop with several Fortune 500 enterprise architects. I was talking about the whole VMware digital workspace journey, and one of the participants in the workshop said, Keith, my primary application is a green screen application, and that is where 80% of my employees and users spend all their time in. What the heck? Like, this is like way extremes. We read about companies going all in the cloud. I think it was not Arthur Anderson. It was Accenture talks about how they're closing down their data centers. And we do this stuff for a living. Like, how hard is it to do a data center migration versus doing a data center migration to the cloud? Like, shutting down a data center is a big deal. I still, as of a couple of years ago, was running SAP on HPUX. I was not going to migrate from HPUX to Linux or Windows just so I could get into the cloud. Like, what's truly driving this migration and capability? What kind of, like, what's the reality on the ground? When we're in our silos, when we're in our organizations, when we're talking to our management teams, when they're asking us, the experts, what should we do? And we go out to our peers and we're trying to figure out what's really happening. Should I be learning cloud? Should I be learning Kubernetes? Should I be learning infrastructure as code? Should I learn Python scripting? Should I double down and get my CCIE? Should I get a VCDX? What should I learn? What should I have my team invest their time into doing? What projects should I invest in? Should I follow the example of Chick-fil-A and deploy some VxRail or VxRack? I don't know what Chick-fil-A put out at their edge. I'm just giving an example of a platform, or a bunch of DL380s. I don't care what the platform is. Should I put a bunch of bare metal compute out at the edge and then install Kubernetes on it and then run these newfangled applications? Where should I make my investments? Whether those investments are that of my employers or my personal time. Keith, give me the easy answer. Well, you know what? I'm a management consultant. I don't give easy answers. I give you kind of ranges of what's happening. After talking to hundreds of customers, I can, without a doubt, tell you there is no easy answer. You have to roll up your sleeves and get involved and determine where you should make your investment. So the goal of the presentation is to give you some type of compass today so you can understand where to start to look at. At the end of the day, you'll know whether or not, should I be learning Kubernetes, or should I get an AWS certification based on, I think, a natural set of information that you have already at your fingertips. So if you guys have not heard me present before, I don't give a lot of information on slides. The slides is just there to help me keep pace. I talk, I know my subject matter, and I like to just have a nice casual conversation. At any point during the presentation, you have a question, raise your hand, and we'll chat about it. We'll change the direction of the conversation. Ariel's heard me present. Ariel, you don't happen to be a Patriots fan by any chance, have you? Okay. Now, I couldn't tell by this is your party every year. It's been, you guys have had some pretty good years. All right, so I asked this question to a lot of people whenever I have this conversation about where to go. And I'll actively ask this audience. I want an answer. Why does the DNS, wait, first off, are there any DNS administrators in the audience? Okay. There you go. I like to pick on the DNS administrators because with really big companies, there are still DNS administrators. So I'll ask this question 2 points in my presentation. Why does the DNS admin exist? Like, I understand DNS has to be managed, but why does the job exist? If you're a manager and you want to open a rec, and we'll pick on the DNS administrator, but the same thing happens to like the VI, the virtual infrastructure admin. Why does that job exist? Why does it add value to the business? If I go to the CFO and I say, you know what, Mr. CFO, Mrs. CFO, I want to open a new rec. That rec is for a virtualization admin, and the salary is, let's say, $75,000. And then the CFO says, okay, the manufacturing facility is asking me for a new ops manager, and the new ops manager is $75,000 as well in salary plus benefits. How does your DNS admin, VI admin, how does he add value to the business versus my ops manager for the manufacturing floor? I intuitively know how a ops manager adds value to the business, but not so much in the world of IT. I don't know why a VI admin or a DNS administrator adds value to the business. Now, ask yourself this same question in a different fashion. How would you leverage Salesforce? How many folks have a Salesforce deployment in your environment? So, how hard of a sale is that to the CFO? Like, what are some of the practical benefits of Salesforce? Let's get some interaction. I'm presenting at 8:30 my time in Chicago, so you guys are way more active. Uh-huh. That is a great intuitive answer. The answer was, excuse me, he doesn't run Salesforce, but CEOs, CFOs get the impression that it enables their sales force. It runs their sales for their company. You know what? There's SAP CRM. We can do that ourselves. We can build there's open source CRM solutions. As system administrators, as smart people, as engineers, we can take some of these same concepts and deploy them on-prem. There's business reasons as to why I want Salesforce. There will be business and technical reasons why I want Salesforce over growing my own. But I think it's safe to say we've done it in the past and we can do it in the future. The more important thing is that there's a instant connectivity of value versus cost. when the sales leader comes to the CFO and says, you know what, I want to purchase Salesforce, and it would help us, one, increase sales by, let's say it's $75,000, the same amount. I want to spend $75,000 to purchase Salesforce. It'll increase our sales and increase our NPS, our net, whatever that thing that us technology companies like to use for net promoter score, NPS, our net promoter score. The CFO, CEO instantly gets that. You know what? That's an easy $75,000 investment. Go back to our DNS admin conversation, and we start to struggle. Wait, how does hiring a DNS administrator or a VI administrator help drive value within the company? My argument isn't that there's not value. My argument is you have to be able to define that value. Okay, let's drill down some more into why this is happening. I know people hate this term, but regardless of how you feel about it, it is real. Digital transformation is driving change within our environments. I'm going to give you two examples of digital transformation that you should be able to relate to. The first is the gym shoe experience. The other day, well, it's not the other, it was a couple of years ago. There was a athlete that I really respect, but he doesn't have his own gym shoe. And I wanted to show my support for this athlete by having a pair of custom gym shoes with the athlete's name at the bottom and his number. In this day and age, that should be something that you should just be able to do. I should just be able to go online and design a shoe, and in a couple of weeks or a couple of months or whatever the time frame, get the shoe. Like, who doesn't? This is 2018, now 2019, but this is my thought process in 2018. I should be able to go to the web, pick my favorite shoe manufacturer, and have a custom shoe made. So intuitively, what website would you go to give me some websites? What website would you go to have that experience, you would think? Nike.com or Reebok.com. So I went to Nike.com, and lo and behold, I'm a runner. I could get a pair of Nike IDs, Nike Frees. I like the flat run shoes. I like to run in flat shoes. And I ordered a pair of custom shoes. And I received them in about 3 weeks. That's digital transformation. 5 years ago, I could not go into a Foot Locker or any other retail store and have that experience. This day and age, I can do that from my living room. And then I get, the nice people on the running trail that says, hey, what are those? Nice. You know what? I just went to Nike.com, ordered a pair of custom shoes. That is an example of a retail digital transformation that Nike has gone through, and they're continually reducing the friction between the consumer and the experience. If Nike had not done that, I would have found another shoe provider that would have gave me that experience. I would have went to Reebok. I would have went to Adidas. I like wearing Nike shoes, but I like to win me over as a customer. If you offer me a better experience, I will switch brands for that better shopping and retail experience. Most of us in the room would have that. So that's on the retail side. What about this concept of farm to table? I worked for a biopharmaceutical. They make one of the biggest, if not the biggest selling drug in the world. And while that's great, that drug will eventually come off of patent and they'll get competition. They're researching and trying to find new drugs. But one of the things that we were actively looking at was this whole concept of, in produce, we call it farm to table. In pharmaceuticals, we called it lab to patient. If I'm making a biopharmaceutical, something that basically is a living drug, so it expires, it has all the characteristics of something that has, excuse me, that have all of these features of a living organism. If I'm going to inject that into my bloodstream, I want to know as much information about that drug as possible. So in the farm-to-table experience, if you make an omelet in the morning, wouldn't it be great to know what farm that omelet came from, what farm the egg came from, what route it took to get to the grocery store, who carried it to the grocery store, how long did it sit in, or to the distribution center, how long did it sit in the distribution center, who handled it from the distribution center to the refrigerator in the grocery store, how long did it sit in the grocery store before I went and bought that egg to make my omelet. If you can provide that information to consumers, an egg is pretty much, it's a commodity thing. I don't go into an egg and say, oh, that's the brand name egg I buy. When my wife sends me to the grocery store to buy eggs, I buy eggs. It's a carton of eggs. I don't care about the name brand on the box. However, if the name brand on the box, if that brand can give me that farm-to-table experience, I'm more apt to care about the commodity of who produced it. Because if there's another outbreak, and I can literally go to my refrigerator, scan the egg, and find out if this egg came from a period or part of the country where there was problem, or the lettuce, or the biopharmaceutical thing that I'm going to inject, or the aspirin. If I can get this farm-to-table experience, then I will commit to a brand. If I can get customized gym shoes in a reasonable amount of time, I will commit to that brand. Digital transformation in a practical sense, not the buzzwordy stuff, but real stuff. Why are companies challenged, or why are companies undergoing digital transformation? One last example. Macy's, Nordstrom's, and high-end retailers have to compete against my mom now. Literally, my mom, Luigi isn't here. Luigi's a local guy. Luigi lives here in Boston. My mom makes these beautiful knitted scarves and hats. Luigi bought one of these things that's not cheap, where he could have went to his local Macy's or the Nordstroms and got a comparable product. But because my mother isn't able, with her iPad, she runs her business off of her iPad, she can set up an Etsy store, she can set up an eBay store, she can set up a site on Facebook, and she can compete for Luigi's dollars versus Luigi going into a mall and buying a similar quality product. Companies have to compete with smaller, agile companies that are being enabled by these technologies. Digital transformation is real. But here's the question. Is your organization challenged by digital transformation? I had competitors in digital transformation. I gave the example of the architect who said, Keith, you know what? 80% of my users spend all their day inside of this green screen application. I talked to another architect in preparation for this presentation just 2 days ago, And he said, I don't see any of this developer demand for resources, needing to do Kubernetes. I can just run VMs in my environment and provide all the capability to my company that my company needs. That is also true. It is the truth. He could not buy he could run vSphere 5.5. And for those who are not aware, I'm not a geek, so I'll defer to the geek in the room, the VMware geek in the room. What's the latest version of vSphere? Huh? 6.7. So what is that, like 4 major releases since 5.5? So about 4 major releases since vSphere 5.5. That company could run vSphere 5.5, and if it was supported, none of his end users would complain, life would be good. So here comes the meat of kind of my advice, is you have to understand the relationship of digital transformation to your organization in your career. You have to learn your business. This is the hard part. This is I wish I could tell you, you know what, go out and get an AWS certification, go out and get an Azure certification, go learn VMware Cloud on AWS, go out and get a CCIE, go back to school and get an MBA. It ain't that simple, just plain and simple. This is the part of being an engineer that, you know, we just have to dig in and learn. You have to ask yourself some business level questions, and I put a few to get you started on your journey. First off, learn who your competitors are. Like, you know, if there was a time where I could be a DNS administrator at a tobacco company, and I could take my skills and be a DNS administrator at a newspaper publisher, and my job was functionally no different. I didn't have to learn the newspaper business versus the tobacco business. In this new world, if you want to skill up, if you want to know where to invest your time, if you want to know where to invest your IT budgets, you need to understand the landscape around it. Simon Wortley, who does the Wortley maps, don't know if you ever heard of this guy, but he was a CIO back in the UK, and he started out as his first job as a CIO. He opened the kimono, is a term, I guess, and talked about what it was like when he first started. He said he had no idea of what he was doing. Like, he didn't know if other CIOs when he started were in the same situation as his, but when he became an advisor, he discovered that this was the case. As the CTO advisor, I'm telling you, this is the case. Most people don't know what they're doing when they first get into these roles. It's kind of making it up as they go. What he discovered was that most executives lacked situational awareness. You can't just go out and say, how many people who have a cloud first? I'm not going to put this question for a survey. You don't have to raise your hand. But I've gone to company after company after company and talked to executives, and then the executive says, you know what, we're public cloud first. We're cloud first, or we're multi-cloud. And when I ask them the why question, they can't go any deeper than, oh, that's what everyone else is doing. We're doing cloud because all of my competitors are doing cloud. We're doing multi-cloud because all of my competitors are doing multi-cloud. We're doing Kubernetes because I read this thing from Keith Townsend, the CTO advisor, on Tech Target that says that everyone's doing Kubernetes. Not exactly what I said, but okay. You have to know, even as an individual contributor, you have to understand the landscape of your industry. So who are your competitors? Who are your customers? What are their needs? If you're a retailer, and you sell a commodity product, what differentiates your commodity product from other commodity products? How is your organization attacking that? Are your customers the Luigis of the world that will buy a scarf online? Or are they the type that will only love the in-store retail experience? What are some of the industry-wide trends? Is there consolidation in the landscape? So one of the things I talked to the guy who had the green screen use case, I asked him, what happens if you're purchased? Is what's happening in your organization similar to what's happening in your competitors? What are the challenges of your individual BUs? So accounting, sales, marketing, what are their business challenges? So a lot of times, as a virtualization admin, we'll look at our vSphere console and we'll say, oh, there's, I have 800 VMs and we're 30% utilization of memory and 20% utilization of CPU, blah, blah, blah. CFO doesn't care about any of that. That's, okay, so what does that mean? What does that mean to the business? Literally, what does that mean to the business? As a BU is challenged with meeting their KPIs, what does a 30% CPU utilization of your vSphere cluster have to do with them selling more gym shoes? We, as engineers, have to start to be able to answer that question. That means that we have to start to dig into what are these VMs doing. Nothing about Kubernetes, nothing about containers, nothing about Docker, nothing about Lambda and serverless, etc. This is just basic 101. What do I do, and how does my job impact the business? You can get additional insights about some of the SaaS applications that your company is adopting. A lot of times, these decisions are being made independent of IT. Workday. Workday, who uses Workday as their HR platform at work? It's highly unlikely that the HR leader consulted IT about Workday, about adopting Workday. It's not even a relevant conversation. From the HR manager's perspective, I need to outsource performance management. Workday does. I went to a conference and someone introduced me to Workday. The HR person engaged Workday, and then after the decision is made, then they come to IT and say, hey, we've signed this deal with Workday, make it happen. What were the drivers behind that decision? You have to get involved and start having conversations. A lot of times we're brought to the table after the fact, but take what they give you. Get involved in the conversation. Don't just say, okay, what are the technical requirements for me to deploy Workday? Understand why they selected Workday. Because you're going to have to build the hooks from Workday to SAP. It's going to happen. Once the HR starts to use these tools, they'll realize, you know what? The data that I have on-prem adds value to this Workday, to this SaaS application in Workday. Office 365, more of the traditional stuff. Why are businesses selecting these products, and what are the drivers for these decisions? All right, and then we get back to this question that I'm just going to keep asking throughout the presentation. What value does the DNS administrator bring to the business? You may actually come to the conclusion and insert, your role here. This is where we start to make it real. What value do you bring to the business? If you have a really hard time understanding what value you bring to the business, the alarm bell should start to ring. You should start to think through, wait, if I can't explain my job, I can definitely explain my job to my manager, but could I explain my job to my manager's manager? Worse, if I had to explain my job to just a business leader, how could I explain it in a way that when he has to make the decision, do I chop this $125,000 salary here, or I chop this $125,000 salary there? Which salary do I chop? Or if I need to add to the business, do I add $125,000 here, or do I add $125,000 there? How do I make that decision? What criteria am I making that decision based on? People outside of IT don't understand IT. You know, I tell family and friends that I'm in IT, sales, and I leave it at that. That's lazy. That should be an opportunity for me to start to explain, to understand how I add value to my business. Going back to the gym shoe scenario, I can make a connection. If I worked for Nike, I could work really hard to make a connection between my job as a frontline employee, low level, at that lowest level. I should be able to say, you know what? The last time you went to Nike.com, and you bought a pair of customized gym shoes, I helped make that happen. That's tangible. That's something that people can understand. All right, last slide. And then hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes for questions. So let's talk about the digital transformation's impact on IT. Some practicals. If your business, after doing the work on the previous slide, and you've learned the business, you learned where the business is going, you learned the trends, you learned about the customers, you start to understand why are business leaders choosing SaaS applications and the factors going into that decision, you start to better understand the impact on daily IT life. I chose these 3 different areas. Service provisioning. This is something that we hear about an awful lot. If you invested time in automation and you bought the time to provision a VM from 8 weeks down to 2 days, 2 hours, 4 weeks, whatever, what tangible impact would that have on the business? In some cases, if you're a COTS-driven application, commonly off-the-shelf, if you provide and support commonly off-the-shelf products or support, and you don't provision that often, taking provision down from 8 weeks to 2 hours really doesn't, in my opinion, add much value. You know, if I'm going to install Exchange, I can adjust my schedule for the Exchange deployment to accommodate 8 weeks versus 2 hours. That's not where the meat of the challenge is. However, if I'm developing a new customer-facing application and I need resources because my competitor just came out with a killer feature and I need an environment right away, going from 8 weeks to 2 hours, big deal. Big deal. Once that project has failed or succeeded, how long does it take to reclaim those resources? Does it even matter? Do I need to reclaim an Exchange? I deploy Exchange 2016. Why I would want to deploy Exchange 2016 on premises, I don't know. I like to do much more interesting. I know that there's drivers, but that just doesn't seem appealing to me. But if I deploy Exchange Server 2016 on-prem, And the 5 servers, 5, 6, 7 servers, VMs that make up that product, those things will probably exist for 5 or 6 years. And I can account for it, not a really big deal. If I'm deploying a new application, we did a podcast episode with the New York Times CTO, and he's building their app, the crossword app, and that app needs to grow and shrink based on demand, and I have it in the public cloud, and it's real money to have resources not being used or idle in the public cloud, then reclaiming resources is kind of a big deal. I affect the bottom line. And this is where we get to cost. How do you control cost in this new digital transformed environment? If you've given developers an API to the data center, like this is one of the scariest things. If I build a private cloud, then I just give the developer a set of APIs and say, have at it. They will consume the data center until it's gone. We're not AWS. We can't build unlimited resources or virtually unlimited resources. Developers are, I'll just call it I'm not gonna, because it may be developers in the room. It's Javon's paradox. If you make a resource easier to consume, users will consume more of those resources. How do I control cost while making it easier to consume? That's an impact to IT. Is there value in chargeback? In the Gartner model of cloud, one of the requirements is that you have chargeback model. In reality, most of us will never do chargeback. It just isn't worth it. There's cultural change that has to happen. Like you can roll out the technology, like literally you can move the public cloud all on. But if you don't have the culture and the infrastructure to charge back companies, the bill will just go to IT and IT will pay the bill. Until you develop a culture in which the consumers, like who pays for the Exchange server? And if you roll out the Exchange server in AWS, who pays for that? If you don't have a chargeback model for the end resources, then chargeback may not be of any value. And if you're an organization that, you have to go into the printer, you have to go to the copier machine, you have to enter a cost center to make a copy, then chargeback may be of value to you. Your organization already has the culture of chargeback. Then how does provisioning, we talked about this a little bit, how does provisioning impact cost? If I give my developers an API to the data center, how do I balance the fact that we don't charge back with the fact that they have virtually unlimited resources? How do I control their habits? And then operations. This is where a lot of us, this is where the rubber meets the road. If I give my developers the ability to spin up 2,000 containers to build some new customer-facing app, how do I ensure that doesn't impact my batch processes that run in SAP? Like, practically, if they're doing some cool thing, and it doesn't matter if this is the public cloud or on-prem, if I give this resource, how does that impact my ability to add a stable service or continue to deliver a stable service to the rest of the business? Digital transformation is cool, but the reality, this is a reality on the ground, I haven't ran into an organization that had more than 5 to 10% of these cloud native apps that made up their infrastructure. Most of the application base are traditional COTS apps or externally developed apps. They're not asking for APIs to the data center, but the super important apps, the new apps, do want this access and API to the data center. So how do I balance the new with the old? What's the impact to the loss of visibility? There's this term called observability. I can't just put a monitoring software on a VM running in the cloud and get the true utilization of the underlying infrastructure. if developers deployed an app using AWS Lambda or Azure Functions, there's not even an OS to monitor. So how do I monitor performance and guarantee performance without having that low-level visibility that I'm accustomed to having in my private data center environment? These are all questions aimed at helping you understand what's next for you. You have to do the hard work of understanding your business. Once you understand your business, you can start asking these practical questions. Once you answer these practical questions, then it becomes much more intuitive to understand what you need to learn and what you need to invest in. If you work in a static industry, there's not much change. You're a B2B business, and your business partners are not asking for this type of frictionless experience, then chances are you can stay on this same road of learning technology for the sake of learning technology. But you're in an industry that's being disrupted or transformed, you need to do the work to understand what is the transformation happening in the industry and what will be the demands on IT as a result. Once you understand the demands on IT as a result, then you'll be able to focus your energies on what you should learn, what projects you should invest in, and how you improve your people, processes, and technology. We'll open it up. I got a couple of minutes. I've saved about 3 or 4 minutes for questions. We'll open it up for questions. Push back, say, hey, Keith, that was a bunch of BS you just poured out there. And we can, I'm here all day and we can have that argument over coffee.
I wondered if your enterprise customers have had trouble navigating the capital depreciation model, operational subscription annual model, and are they signing long-term deals, or is it all year-to-year planning for the money?
So that's a good practical question from, I think, I work for a vendor and I've advised customers. The question is this transition. This transition is tough on both sides, from a CapEx versus OpEx, ELA versus subscription versus pay-as-you-go. This causes problems on both sides, for the vendor and for the IT vendor and for the customer. From a budget, just from a practical budget perspective, there's been years where I have, as a customer, that I have plenty of CapEx money. Like, if I'm begging vendors to give me the service or product in a way that I can depreciate it over 5 years because I have what seems like an unlimited depreciation budget. Then there's years where I can spend as much as I want on contractors and OpEx, but I can't add any depreciation. I actually worked with a Fortune 50, I'll let you do the math. I worked with a Fortune 50 IT services and infrastructure provider when I was back at PwC, whose number one KPI for that year was reducing depreciable cost. And there was no money for transformation. They just had to reduce the depreciable cost. What does that practically mean from an IT perspective? They had to get rid of servers. Physical servers they had to get rid of. The CEO and CFO didn't care how you did it, just get rid of servers. So that is a problem. That is not a problem, that's a challenge. From both a customer organization perspective and a vendor perspective, managing the transition from going from a CapEx to OpEx model, no one has figured out how to do that to a point that it's a repeatable process across organizations. It is a unique challenge for every organization today. It's a snowflake. Any other questions? All right, some plugs. I work for VMware. VMware funded this. Make sure you guys check out VMware products and solutions at VMware.com. VMware also has its own user group community VMUG. You can check those guys out at vmug.com. Some personal plugs. If you want to, if this was not enough Keith Townsend CTO advisor for you, I've written and created a ton of content. You can go to thectoadvisor.com where you can see video interviews. I've hosted the Cube, who's our good friend Stu Miniman is here today. I'll be on a Cube set today, being interviewed by him. There's a ton of other articles, et cetera, et cetera. You can find all that stuff, including the podcast. You can find that at thectoadvisor.com. I am here all day. I'll be at the happy hour. Thanks for spending your morning with me.